Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 26 series, Rescue the Rockies. And the off-season is about to get underway after we ended our season in the National League Championship Series against the New York Mets, who went on to lose in the World Series against the Houston Astros. Last episode, we took a look at our roster, did our annual roster review, and started planning for this off season. I got a lot of good suggestions, not just on the roster, but perhaps some ideas on what we can do to reinvigorate the interest level in this series a little bit as we continue to move forward with these Rockies, or perhaps move forward with something a little bit different. So we'll talk about some ideas from the Worldwide Scouting Department on that front later in the episode. But we're going to start off this episode with a couple of housekeeping items, following up on some things we talked about in the last episode, and then do our annual review of the top prospects in our organization, because we do have some pretty interesting players on the way to hopefully supplement this very strong roster. Our old buddy Evan Kluver, former first-round pick who we traded away to the Yankees for the injured and soon-to-be an ex-Rocky James Wood, is actually on the waiver wire, but at this point we'll let somebody else pick up Packy Kluver and try to salvage his career, which we unfortunately struggled with. Made a few decisions as far as our salary arbitration eligible players. We made an arbitration offer to Bernie Barrera. We'll be bringing back, or at least attempting to bring back, the infielders Trent Kaysen and Derby Mahez with arbitration offers. And Phil Dingwell, who missed the entire year with an injury, also made an offer to him. We are almost certainly going to move on from the starting pitcher, Aaron Bell. The question is whether we can get anything for him in a trade. Still considering our options for our backup catcher among Nate Harris and Mike Girard. Girard is certainly a better defender and certainly a better hitter as a right-handed hitter against left-handed pitching in a platoon, which is the role that we envision for either of these players. But Girard set to make almost 3 times more than Harris next year. And he's also still fragile in terms of his injury proneness and missed a lot of time over the course of his career. So they're both potentially good options as a backup catcher. There are probably better options than either of them out there that might be available. So still uncertain whether we bring 0, 1, or 2 back between Harris and Girard, so going to give that a little more thought. And last but not least, the lefty starting pitcher Bob Russell, who we traded I don't want to say a king's ransom, but we definitely traded a lot of good players, particularly hitters, to the Braves to bring him on board. We've made an offer to him, but it's not an arbitration-eligible offer. We're trying to lock up Bob Russell for the medium term at this point. He is willing to consider a $81 million deal over 6 years, which would buy out his final 2 arbitration-eligible seasons and then 4 years of free agency. I think he's a very solid 2 or 3 starter for us behind Leo Martinez. So we would love to try to get Russell signed for the medium term to this Rockies franchise. We've also made one tentative change to our lineup in the player development lab, and that is, interestingly, I'm sure to some of you, not investing further in Leo Martinez, our outstanding ace starter. We had him planned to go into a endurance training role to try to improve his endurance. But as I thought about the franchise more fulsomely. Right now, I'm thinking about having our first round pick from this past year, Justin Denmark Morgan, work on improving his pitch arsenal. You may remember when we picked him up, a college player out of University of Louisiana Lafayette. Picked him 34th overall. He's considered the number 28 prospect in baseball at this point. Was 4-0 with a 2.93 ERA in Double-A Hartford for us after he made his debut following the end of the draft league where he was playing for the Trenton Thunder. But the big concern about Morgan is whether he's going to really develop that changeup into an effective major league pitch. And if he can probably be a good, solid, middle-of-the-rotation starter for us if he reaches his full potential. If he can't, he's probably going to be a long/middle reliever. So getting him into the lab to work on improving his pitch arsenal, I felt was just potentially a bit more of a high upside, high potential leverage move for this organization to make, rather than hoping against hope that the 28-year-old Leo Martinez would be able to stretch out a little bit as far as his stamina. So obviously haven't started moving forward yet, so still time for us to reconsider this decision and all of the other decisions that we've put together here in our proposed plans for the development lab, but wanted to share my latest thoughts on that topic with the worldwide scouting department. And moving on to our annual check-in and check-up of our top prospects, you can see that with the patch from several months ago to the game, definitely horrendously messed up something in the lower levels of the organization. Most obvious with our ACL team, which is the team that's filled with the prospects that we have been drafting basically with the last or one of the last handful of picks in the first round for the last decade, playing against teams that should be filled with players who were all picked before the guys that we were picking. And that team went 52-0 this year. And I think I've mentioned historically in OOTP, I've generally really struggled in my rookie ball teams, particularly. I tend to draft probably a few more high school players than some others do in the game. And over the last several versions of the game, there's been years and decades on end when I've been struggling to win with those teams. And it's actually derailed the development of some of my players because they've been so upset by, 17 win seasons in the ACL and the DSL. So I haven't really changed anything with how I manage those teams. But clearly the patch from a few months ago has funked up how the minor league systems of other teams are run and the way their teams are populated and staffed, which is still disappointing, but just figured sure some of you would notice those ridiculous records in the lower levels of the minor leagues and figured I would just talk about that again. But despite those late picks, we've had tons of money to invest in player development, and that might be, something that as we move on in this series, and certainly as we think about what we might be doing in OOTP 27, might want to put in some additional house rules around that, because the minor league system ranks first overall at this point, despite the fact that, as I mentioned, we've been picking at the end of the first round for over a decade at this point. And a very rich farm system at this point, where you can see a lot of top 100 players, led by the number 4 prospect in baseball, Carlos Barrel Davila, our international free agent signing from 2034. Spent most of the year in Double-A Hartford, where he really wasn't great. Put up a 98 WRC plus, hit 275, so slightly more effective than he was in 2037 at that level. but still felt, even though he's only 21 years old, after over 200 games in Double-A, it was time to give him a change of scenery and promote him to Triple-A, where he played the last month of the season. And he was definitely more effective there. Got the batting average over 300, 115 WRC plus. Still was above a replacement level player there. No questions about his speed. No questions about his ability to play defensively in the infield. Exactly what his bat will become is still a big question. We've never really expected a lot of home run power from him, but still holding out hope that his contact, his gap power, and his eye could all end up above average, or in the case of his gap power, well above average, and still think he could be a very important infielder for us in Colorado for many years to come. Already talked about Justin Morgan, our first-round pick from this past year. Both he and Davia, along with shortstop Nils Mensch, the number 31 prospect in baseball, are slated to be getting some attention in the development lab in the long programs that we'll be getting shortly. Mensch spent most of this year with our ACL team, where he hit a ridiculous over 500, moved him briefly to the DSL to help that team, where he also hit over 500 again. I don't understand how these other teams are just fielding complete scrubs across the lower levels of their minor league system when they are drafting before us, and they have, in most cases, more money to spend on international amateur free agents than we do at this point. Marquis Mensch then got promoted to Single A at the age of 19, and he hit .322 with 6 homers and 34 ribbies in 31 games in Fresno. So he, when we compare him to Davia, probably will ultimately have a better bat than Davia if he reaches his full potential. Not quite the same kind of glove, but still really hopeful that those two guys and some other prospects that we're going to be talking about will be core members of our infield in the not-too-distant future. Mike Witherspoon is our final top 50 prospect. The former first-round pick is almost 22 years old at this point. Started the year in Double-A Hartford, where he was 8-1 with a 4.57 ERA. Ended the year with 10 starts at AAA Albuquerque, 4-2 with a 3.53 ERA. Doesn't necessarily looks like he's going to be an ace, but with that high adaptability and work ethic, really good stamina, an arsenal that looks like it could have 5 average to slightly above average major league quality pitches. Still think he could be a very effective middle of the rotation type starter for us, and certainly a guy who could be a 2-starter, and if he reaches his full potential, even a 1-starter on a lot of teams. But fortunately, with Leo Martinez on the squad, we don't need that type of upside from Mike Witherspoon, but still really optimistic about the young lefty. Starting pitcher Ezekiel Caban, second-round pick of ours this past year in the draft, now listed as the number 52 prospect in baseball. When we look at what we think his ceiling is, it's looking like a middle-of-the-rotation starter is a ceiling, but he still hasn't even made his professional debut at this point. Closer Eric Schweitzer, who we picked up when we traded Drew Romo to the White Sox a little over 5 years ago at this point, the number 57 prospect in baseball. Started the year in Double-A Hartford, where he had 29 saves in 77 strikeouts in just 43 2/3 innings. He got promoted to Triple-A Albuquerque at the age of 22, and certainly looks like someone who will be competing to be an important right-hander out of our bullpen in the not-too-distant future. So with Nils Mensch and Eric Schweitzer, 2 of the top 60 prospects in baseball are German nationals who are on this Colorado Rockies team. I think even though he's no longer working on OOTP, Marcus still has his hands on the game somehow. Gustavo Esqueda, the number 64 prospect in baseball, international free agent signing from 2037, made his professional debut in rookie ball for us this year. Hit .332 with 8 homers and a silly 79 ribbies in 223 at-bats. Silent Jake, still looking like a potentially interesting bat with a pretty good glove, and he's got a good personality to hopefully help him with his development. And our final top 100 prospect, starting pitcher Carlos Sotelo, international free agent signing from 2035. Spent the entire year in Single A Fresno, was 3-0 with a 4.84 ERA. Another guy looks like a middle to back of the rotation type of starter if he reaches his full potential at this point. Is already fragile and doesn't have the greatest personality traits, but despite those issues, he still is a guy who can touch triple digits on the radar gun, has a ton of stamina, and those are some of the reasons why Cushion Sotelo is listed as the number 70 prospect in baseball. Got 3 more guys ranked between number 101 and number 200. Another infielder, second baseman Alex Gamez, second-round pick from back in 2036. Another guy who batted over 500 in rookie ball for us. We promoted him midway through the year to Single A Fresno, where he hit over 400 in 162 at-bats. Looking like he could be a slightly above average major league hitter if he reaches his full potential, with a decent glove, like his range and error rating. The arm not great, and unfortunately the turn double play rating isn't great, given that with those ratings probably envision him as mostly a natural second baseman. He could certainly be more than competent at the position, but probably not a gold glove type second baseman. Steve Guillory, who we picked in the 3rd round a year ago in 2037, 7-0 in rookie ball, before we promoted him as a 19-year-old up to A-ball, where he went 4-0 with a 2.42 ERA over 26 innings in 4 starts. Another guy doesn't necessarily looks like an ace, but looks like a good, solid potential major league pitcher, like the durability, like the stamina, like the personality traits. Think that those ground ball tendencies with our good defensive infield and half of our home games in cores could play reasonably well for us. Final top 200 prospect in our organization, the starting pitcher Orlando Preciado, scouting discovery in 2036. Unfortunately, he suffered a torn labrum in his shoulder in August, was 5-0 with a 2.33 ERA for our DSL team before he suffered that injury. He'll be 20 by February, which is right about when he should be getting healthy. Would expect that he'll be in A-ball next year. Probably not as much upside as some of these other guys. Best case scenario for him, at least according to our scout, looks like probably a back of the rotation type starter if he comes close to reaching his full potential. Won't go through all the rest of our top 200 prospects, but we'll focus on a couple of names that we have talked about in the past. Second baseman Michael McCottrell was our first-round pick in 2037. He made his professional debut this year, hitting .358, 22 doubles, 6 triples, and 6 homers in just 47 games. Never going to hit a ton of home runs once he gets to a higher level of ball, but potentially outstanding gap power, speed to go with a respectable-looking glove and average-ish contact and an average-ish eye if he reaches his full potential. Certainly think he could have some value as an infielder, but Wito McCottrell has a lot of growing up to do before he's going to be ready for the majors. Elliot Bedford, AAA this year, 3rd-round pick in 2034. Don't know that he's quite ready to be our backup catcher this upcoming season. Still think we'd be better off with Gerard or Harris in that role. And as we talked about last episode, perhaps Gerard in that role and stashing Harris in AAA. But Bedford should be in the mix to be our backup catcher in the not-too-distant future. Hit .296 in 36 games in AA before we promoted him up to AAA. Did hit just .230 in the Pacific Coast League, but he did have 16 homers, 49 ribbies. Still was below replacement level and only a 68 WRC plus. He's only a slightly above average defensive catcher, and it doesn't look like his bat is really going to be anything special. At this point, kind of envisioning him as a backup catcher of the future for us. We did also play him a little bit at first base. May also this upcoming year give him a little action in left field or right field. Never going to be a guy that we'd want to have as a regular player in any of those positions with his bat. But given that he is durable and we're envisioning him only as a backup catcher unless we have some injury issues, can't hurt, in my view, to have a little more positional flexibility with him if and when we have some injuries at other positions down the line. He's a guy who can at least give us some options if some players get banged up or we just get into a long extra inning game where we start running out of players. Last couple guys to talk about. Starting pitcher Makoto Hirota, scouting discovery from back in 2034. Played on both of our rookie teams this year, was a combined 8-0. Another guy who looks like a back of the rotation starter, is kind of a best case scenario for him at 20 years old. Would think that he'll be an A-ball for us next year. We talked about Danny Dominguez last episode, a guy who's going to be fighting for a roster spot this upcoming year. And then Ted Slade was a 15th round pick back in 2033. The 23-year-old combined for 53 homers and 131 ribbies in AA and AAA this year, hitting over 300 at both levels. Does not bring much to the table defensively. You can see we ended up DHing him towards the end of this past season. But the one thing he can do is hit a lot of home runs. He'll draw an average number of walks. Not the greatest contact hitter in the world. Not a lot of speed. We mentioned he doesn't really bring much to the table defensively. And the gap power is below average as well. But while he is cheap, we think he could be an interesting bat for us to consider, particularly against left-handed pitching. So we've still got some interesting decisions ahead of us as we start preparing for this offseason. And as we just discussed, a lot of very interesting prospects that we've been selecting and signing and trying to develop over the last several years who could certainly be supplementing this major league roster over the next several seasons to keep things interesting for us. But I've definitely gotten feedback that the episodes and this series is due for a little spice, something to change things up. Downtown Jake perhaps put it most bluntly and directly and accurately when he said, "It's just gotten boring, you need to find a new team." Patrick DeBonis gave a number of suggestions about potentially making the settings even more challenging than the ones that we started with this year, and perhaps adding some additional house rules. Still debating whether I want to do any of that stuff on the fly right now, but certainly as we think about next year's version of OOTP, probably we'll try to put in even more house rules from the start to try to make things a little more interesting. And obviously at some point have to kind of hope that the folks at OOTP Developments can continue to improve the AI. You would think that over time most humans are hopefully at this point still going to be able to win. But don't mind if they continue improving the AI every year to hopefully improve the challenge of the game. Another suggestion from Patrick DeBonis, and I'm sure it pained him as a Red Sox fan to make this suggestion, but was maybe I should take over my beloved New York Yankees, who were the second worst team in baseball this past year at 62-100, 30 games out, 28th in the league in runs scored, or 26th in the league in runs scored, 28th in the league in ERA, and they have been a pretty bad team for quite some time at this point. Signing of Jason Brabeck was definitely difficult for them. They signed him to a 7-year contract before this past season for $314 million. Tore an elbow ligament after going 2-4 with a 5.64 ERA. He signed for another 6 years. He's wrecked physically, and he's going to be 30 years old next year. Still looks like he should be a competent-ish, actually should be a good, solid major league pitcher if he still has those ratings on the other side of this injury. Don't want to diminish what he is, but 30 years old and getting older, already wrecked physically, coming off of another major injury, and set to be making well over $40 million a year for another 6 seasons. La Chispa is a big anchor around this Yankees franchise, which, as we talked about, is not in a great spot right now. And they will, of course, always have tons of money to spend, although their budget is down to 5th in baseball. Sadly, despite that 62-100 record, they had the 6th highest player payroll. But still a ton of money for them to play with at this point. You can see the market size is astronomical. The fan loyalty is great. The fan interest is still outstanding. I think there would be a couple painful years if we took the Yankees over, but I think we would ultimately be successful there. And they do actually have a general manager opening right now. So moving on to one of the worst teams in baseball from Colorado, and the team that even here in fictional 2038 still holds a warm spot in my heart, is an interesting option for us to consider. But I have made the point that part of the reason I wanted to potentially stick with these Rockies was to guide Kevin Five Tools Roberts and Leo Martinez through the second halves of their careers. I think as a homegrown hitter, Roberts, who we picked with the 4th or 5th pick in the draft, the 5th pick overall in 2026, and Leo Martinez, who was a scouting discovery of ours a little over a decade ago, are probably the best homegrown combination I've ever had in terms of a position player and a pitcher who were both in their prime at the same time in their careers. And I think it would be really interesting to see if we can help guide them both to Hall of Fame and perhaps even borderline legendary careers in this game. So that's something that encourages me a bit to stick with the Rockies, although we could certainly move to another team and I could follow their careers from afar, and with a team like the Yankees, certainly have the money to bring either of them on board, although probably would not have the trade resources to bring them on board at this point. But another kind of potentially less disruptive way to hopefully spice up the series and make things a little different, at least in terms of the challenge, and force some interesting decisions on me, is a suggestion that was made by Avery Shaham and seconded by Raven Spawn 3, and Patrick DeBonis was also largely on board with, and that was potentially considering doing an expansion team. And I've had the automatic evolution of this league turned off. I just didn't want anything random to happen out of the blue in terms of expansion or other changes that didn't really want to interrupt my pristine environment that was very similar to real life 2025 baseball when we started. Those of you who have followed the channel over a year know that I did, I guess it was it 2 years ago or was it 3 years ago at this point? I did a expansion team from the start with the Buffalo Wings, which is probably at this point still my favorite series that I've ever done. But we could expand the league and schedule an expansion draft. That's not something that I have actively done in many years in OOTP. As I mentioned, we did the expansion team with Buffalo a few years ago for the channel, and there's certainly been other series that I've played offline, certainly, and I can't remember if at times online where there has been expansion that has just occurred through the normal evolution of the league. But I've never actually just randomly 10, 15, 20 years into the playthrough done the expand league and schedule expansion draft. And given how deep our roster is right now at the major league level and also with some of the minor league prospects, it would be a way in terms of the players that I could protect for the expansion draft to potentially make things a little bit more challenging and a little bit more interesting. I think ultimately, if we added a couple of teams, one of the other suggestions was to potentially change the league setup. Presumably that would be to going to 4 8-team divisions or 8 4-team divisions across the different leagues. I don't know that I'm going to do that right now. If I do an expansion draft, I think at this point for the first season, we would just put one more team in the National League, one more team in the American League, and there would be 2 divisions with 6 teams, given that there's 3 teams that are non-division winners making the playoffs as a wild card each year. I don't think it's a great advantage or disadvantage to be in a 5 or a 6-team division. And I think we're going to go ahead and we're going to do that right now. I intended to pick a couple of different cities that I didn't think were necessarily going to be right on the top of the list of teams that would get expansion if Major League Baseball expanded today. And one of them is actually a city that was just selected here, Indianapolis. They're going to get a team that is going to go into the AL Central. But we are going to click another city, and I'll let you know where that team's going to go shortly. And we're going to give expansion teams, as I noted, to Indianapolis, the Indianapolis Racers, who are going to be joining the American League Central. And then we're going to add an expansion team in our division out in the National League West, the Salt Lake Trappers. And we'll go and we will set up some minor league affiliations next. I won't bore you with all the details, but I'm going to try to get a few more realistic cities for these lower levels of the minor league organizations for these teams. And I'm also going to have to give some thought just to make sure that we keep the leagues balanced. Probably am going to keep their expansion or their minor league teams in all of the same leagues just so we're keeping an even number of teams in every league to hopefully simplify the scheduling for the AI when all is said and done. And I didn't spend too much time with the minor league expansion wizard. There were no default teams in the DSL, so I had to use the Add Minor League Team tab to add those potential teams, and I actually didn't change any of the default leagues and divisions for these teams. Just try to make the locations a little more logical with where some of those teams are located. I know in a perfect world, the Indianapolis Racers probably wouldn't be having teams in the PCL, the Northwest League, and the California League, but I'm just going to try to keep things as simple as I possibly can. So a double A, triple A, high A, single A, ACL/FCL, and DSL team for each of these teams. And we will, I don't know that I need to create entire minor league system. I think, haven't I kind of done that at this point? So we're going to move on to the next step. Create free agents, fill minors with fictional players. Yeah, this is going to be real interesting because this is going to give me some challenging things as far as protection, given the richness of our minor league system, which will definitely shake things up and give me some interesting decisions to make. We're going to create new coaches, assign new coaches, schedule an expansion draft. Expanded teams draft first in the rookie draft. I think we're going to be generous to these expansion teams and let them in the next rookie draft pick right at the top. Create free agents and fill minors with fictional players. I think I am going to do that just to hopefully help get those teams built. At this point, all of the minor leagues are filled with completely fictional players at this point. So I don't see that being a big issue. Number of protected players looks like the default is 25. And auto protect players with less than 3 years of service. So what that means is that although the 25 protected players sounds relatively generous, given that we've got a 26-man major league roster, we are having to also protect some guys with more than 3 years of minor league service who aren't on our 26-man roster or our 40-man roster yet. So I think that's definitely going to leave us with some very interesting decisions, given that we really like our major league roster and we also really like our minor leagues and have the number one minor league in baseball. Can see the default is no limit picks from a certain team. I think keeping that would be a way to really allow these two teams to just ravage our roster. There's part of me that likes that because I think it will make things a little more challenging to us, because I'm assuming I'm guessing it's going to be like 60 players, 30 each, or maybe even more than that are selected by these two teams for the expansion draft. It wouldn't be shocking to me if 10 or 15 players out of our organization get selected So I think there's an argument that it just in terms of making things more challenging to me to not have a limit. I think in terms of realism, though, limit probably intuitively makes some sense. I don't think any owners are really going to want a situation where some organizations in expansion draft are losing 2 or 3 players while other teams in an expansion draft are losing 10 or 15 players. And I think in this situation, you could also argue that with us being the best roster in baseball and the best farm system in baseball, the 29 other teams almost might not want those 2 expansion teams to get access to really totally ravage our organization, since it's going to allow those 2 expansion teams to perhaps get up the curve and pass a lot of those other teams a little bit quicker. I want to say that I think the default is 30 to 40 players per team. I'm sure we'll be figuring that out shortly. In terms of the number of teams that players that people can draft, but even if it's 50 per team, which I don't think it's that high, that's 100 players divided by 30 teams, so that's an average of 3 players per team, even if we let these expansion teams draft 50 players each, which I think is overkill given that we are also letting them already fill up their minors with fictional players and fictional prospects. I think, like in a real expansion draft, and I was trying to do this in a equitable and fair way, you kind of have to put some type of limit on the number of picks from any given team. But given that part of the goal of this is just to shake up this series and hopefully ultimately make things a little bit more challenging for me, I think we're going to go with no limit. My hunch is that there's going to be a ton of players taken from us, given that we've got such a strong roster and such strong prospects in our organization, and even just very good AA and AAA teams filled with a lot of kind of 4A players that we've either developed or signed over the years. So I think in a lot of players who have really good personalities, who are good in the clubhouse, good helping their counterparts develop, have those captain personalities across our organization, who certainly have more than 3 years of experience and who aren't going to be among the 25 players that we're ultimately protecting. So I think just in terms of shaking things up, we're going to go with no limit as far as the picks from a single team. As I said, I think that's going to mean that we are going to be absolutely decimated in terms of just our organizational depth in the players who get selected. But that'll make things more interesting. So we're going to go ahead and expand the league. Let's hope this all works out. And I may have been misunderstanding the last screen. I thought it said at one point that the expansion lists were going to be due tomorrow and then the draft would be on the next day. Now it's saying existing teams have to submit the protection lists by November 30th, and then the draft itself is held 1 day later. So it looks like that is happening 3.5, 4 weeks from now, that we need to give the protection list and get ready for the expansion draft. So that actually makes things a little more interesting, because we're going to have to make our arbitration decisions before then. Part of me was hoping that, I would leave a guy like Aaron Bell off of our 25-man protected list and just hope a guy like him got taken. Although given that they can take as many people from us, that strategy is perhaps a little less interesting than if there were only 4 or 6 players who could get picked by our team. Before we finish thing up, I'll just take a look at the expansion draft. 35 rounds. So I said I thought it was 30 or 40. So there's going to be 70 players selected by the Racers and the Salt Lake Trappers. And I do like the intuition, as much as they mess up the some of the things in this game. I was just talking and complaining about the AI as far as the minor league organizations, but they've got a little checkered flag logo here for the Indianapolis Racers, and they've got a little T for the Salt Lake Trappers. So certainly better than anything someone as uncreative as me would have come up with in the spur of the moment. So we're going to be able to protect 25 players. No limit on the number of players who can be selected, though, so it will be interesting to see, of the 70 players selected by the Racers and the Trappers, how many of them end up being from our organization. Protection lists. Search on potential, and yeah, this is going to be interesting, because we've got, obviously the experienced veterans, the Leo Martinez, Mike Castro, Johnny Castillo, Kevin Roberts Jr., Chris Kennedy. We're obviously going to be protecting the best players in our organization. But guys like Carlos Davila, Eric Schweitzer, Ryan Bull, Mike Witherspoon, Jeff Colson, guys who aren't on the 26-man roster right now, are likely going to be strong candidates for us to have to protect, which is going to put us in a situation where, when we think about our 26-man roster for next year, do we keep a Justin Gibson or leave him out there? He's had an incredible run for us, but he just opted into the final year of a $15 million contract. He's probably a little overpaid for what he is right now. Do we protect a guy like Justin Gibson, who's been such a critically important reliever for us over the years, given that when all is said and done for the 25 players we're going to protect, probably going to end up wanting to protect about 10 true young studs who we're not going to want to get rid of, which means that of our 26-man roster, we're only going to be able to protect about 15 guys on it right now. Ted Miller, I don't think we're going to have an option to protect him. The timing of this is a little bit weird, because free agency filings happen on the 29th, so although Miller's on our list right now, presumably he's going to hit free agency. Noah Schultz is another guy that's all of a sudden a pretty interesting decision. 35 years old, fragile physically, not an ace anymore, set to make $25 million in the last year of his contract next year. Do we potentially let him go for nothing and weaken our rotation further? What do we do with the catchers? We talked about, do we want Gerard back? Do we want Nate Harris back? Now maybe there's an argument to make arbitration offers to both of them, but perhaps leave one of them available in the draft. We talked last episode about Elan Fernandez. Actually, it was not Elan Fernandez. Where is he? Elian Pena, we talked about last episode. I'm getting my middle infielders who are in their early 30s who are part of this organization messed up, but he's excellent defensively. Put up almost a 3 WAR for us next year, but not much of a hitter. Set to make $11 million next year. Do we protect him or not? A lot of very interesting decisions, and I think we're going to ultimately get into a pretty interesting number game, only being able to protect 25 guys, and it's also going to, I think, really be interesting that we don't have a limit on the number of players who can be picked by any given team. As I said, I could be completely wrong, but it would not shock me if out of the 70 players who are selected in this draft, 10 or more of them come from our organization and really kind of take away some of the second tier but still pretty good prospects in our organization, take away some of our high quality leadership 4A kind of player depth, and then we're also probably going to lose a handful of players that we had anticipated would be on our 26-man roster next year. So this is definitely going to make things more interesting for me. I don't know how those of you who are watching are feeling about this, but definitely feeling like we need to do something to try to shake this series up a bit. And I think that the expansion draft and the fact that there's only so many really high quality prospects and high quality players that we're going to be able to protect is going to force us to make some interesting decisions. You know, you think about Matt Stream recovering from a torn rotator cuff for the next 4 to 5 months, a guy that we traded for last year. Ryan Bull, a guy who's come up through our organization, also dealing with a torn rotator cuff. 23 years old. We think he's got incredibly high potential. But can we protect a guy who's only pitched 3 games above high A ball, recovering from a pretty significant injury, and putting a guy like Ryan Bull among our 25 guys that we protect could ultimately mean that, you know, Josh Joss or a Melvin Reyes or, you know, another guy who's kind of a proven major leaguer is someone that we have to not protect and potentially lose. And then I start thinking about the permutations with a guy like Aaron Bell. I had talked not that long ago about how we almost certainly weren't going to make him an offer in arbitration. Now, do we try to sign Aaron Bell and protect him and then hope that somebody takes him? I guess we don't. I think if it was a situation where we could only have like a given number of players taken from our squad, then I think there's maybe an argument to try to bring on a guy who just won 13 games, put up a WAR of almost 3, and probably has some value making $9 million a year to another team, even though he, in theory, isn't one of our top 5 starters next year with some of the youth that we have. But since we don't anticipate having him on the team next year, and they're going to be able to take as many players from our team as they want, if we really don't want Bell, I think we just try to trade him now before we get to that expansion draft. So this definitely has me a little invigorated, a little excited. I think it will give me some real interesting things to think about as we start preparing for that expansion draft in the not too distant future. Next time around, we're going to start playing through this off season. We'll get through award season. We'll get through salary arbitration and free agency filings. And then we will probably finish the episode right before the expansion draft to see exactly who's part of our organization, what our team looks like, and I'll kind of talk through the 25 players that I'm thinking about protecting, or at least maybe the 20 real obvious players to protect, and then maybe kind of the 10 or 15 guys that I'm considering protecting with those last 5 slots, and hopefully give the worldwide scouting department a little bit of an opportunity to share your thoughts with me before I make some decisions. So I think ultimately, at least this gives us something different to think about, gives me something interesting and different to do that I haven't done, I think, ever in a series that I have played online. I've certainly had to do expansion drafts in the past when I've just been playing the game on my own, although obviously it's not incredibly frequent because I couldn't remember that the default was for 35 players to be taken in that draft. But it's ultimately going to hopefully weaken this organization a bit that, as I mentioned, won 110 games at the major league level and has the top farm system in baseball. So hopefully that will help bring us back to the pack a little bit. This, I don't want to say perfectly built roster, but this roster that when I think about it right now, we intend to have probably 23 or 24 guys who are currently on our 26-man roster back on our 26-man roster next spring. And we're certainly not going to be able to do that because I'm thinking best case scenario, we probably protect 16, 18 major league guys because we're going to probably need 8 to 10 slots to protect some of the top prospects in our organization who aren't in the majors yet. So it's going to lead to some interesting decisions. You know, an Anthony Pack Jr., what do we do with him? Ryan Stone, is he a guy that we protect? We probably want him back next year, but is he going to be one of the top 25 guys in our organization to protect? I'm excited. I know that this may not be the huge change that some of you were looking for in the series, but to me it's going to hopefully make things more interesting, hopefully make things a little more challenging, and give us something different for me to think about, and hopefully for the worldwide scouting department to think about as well. So appreciate your thoughts on this, and next time around we're going to start making some real decisions as far as our final arbitration eligible players, and start getting this team prepared for free agency and ultimately for an expansion draft. Until our next episode, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day. Sorry, I just couldn't help myself. I know I said goodbye and I said that the episode was ever, but I've since then just started playing with what this expansion draft could look like, and I know that it's something that probably many members of the worldwide scouting department want to give a little more thought to. So I kind of projected tentatively 18 very obvious players in my mind, the best players on our major league roster today, as well as some of the highest potential prospects in our organization who have more than 3 years of experience. And you can see that leaves us with just 7 additional players to potentially protect. And I think this really helps visualize some of the difficult decisions that we're going to have ahead of us. And granted, there's no guarantee that all 18 of these guys will ultimately be protected, although I tend to think most of them will be. But with only 7 additional players to protect, you look at the pitchers. Ryan Bull, a very high-end prospect that we talked about. Jason McKinney, an excellent young left-handed reliever who we traded for just a year ago. Jake Lyons, former second-round pick, one of the top relief prospects in our organization. Jeff Colson, former first-round pick. Justin Gibson, making good money, but one of the top relievers in baseball. Kikaku Kawakami, potential fourth or fifth starter for us down the line. Matt Stream, once one of the top prospects in baseball, a guy we traded for this past offseason. Noah Schultz, two-time Cy Young Award winner on the back nine of his career, but still a very effective pitcher, but making a lot of money. Aaron Bell, fifth starter for us this year. Danny Dominguez, another guy who certainly in the mix to be a fourth or fifth starter for us next year. And then kind of taking a look at the batters that right now we're not able to protect. Ted Miller and James Wood are both potential free agents that we're going to move on from, but outside of protecting our starting catcher, J.D. Lee, catcher across our organization could be absolutely decimated. Mike Girard, former starter, was our backup this year and a great platoon guy against left-handed pitching. Nate Harris, who's been a backup for us the past several years. Brad Bazell, a prospect. Elliot Bedford, our backup catcher of the future. Starting center fielder Anthony Pack Jr., starting shortstop Elian Pena, starting first baseman Ryan Stone, Ted Slade, the guy who just hit over 50 home runs in the upper levels of the minor leagues last year. Hendrik Jan van Gorkum, one of the top infield prospects in our organization. Chris Dupree, another infield prospect. All these names that we just mentioned, we can only protect 7 more of them if we keep these 18 guys. So this is going to be fun. We're definitely going to lose some organizational depth, but I think that's probably a good thing. I think pretty much every guy that I just talked about that doesn't make it onto the 25-man protected list is going to get picked by another team. And there's certainly some other guys who could, Leo Landa, Ruben Narvaez, some guys who were pretty prominent international amateur free agents of ours in the past. Jarrett Woods just hit 18 homers and 66 ribbies for us as a starting third baseman as a rookie. He's not protected right now. More catchers, Glenn Doel, Lonzo Florioli, another guy who we thought could be a big part of our future at some point when we picked him years ago. Even going down the pitcher list, Joe Burke, I believe he was a pretty high draft pick of ours. Yeah, 4th round pick from back in 2034. Jonathan Horning, former 1st round pick in 2033. I tend to think we aren't going to be protecting these kind of guys, but it's going to be interesting. We're definitely going to get caught in a big numbers game being able to protect just 25 guys across our organization who have more than 3 years of professional experience. So should be good to make some tough decisions and lose some interesting players. And ultimately, I'm sure there will be some debate about the 25 guys that we protect. And ultimately, with no limits on how many of our players can be taken away from us, I think we're going to lose a lot of guys in this expansion draft. Until the next time, thanks again for watching, and hope you have a great day.